In the scorching summer of 1876, the vast, unforgiving desert stretched endlessly under a blazing sun. Devil's Anvil, a narrow canyon tucked between jagged cliffs, stood isolated from the nearby settlements. The land was harsh, unforgiving, and often deadly. Settlers who dared live near the canyon knew that danger was never far away. The wind carried the sound of rattlesnakes and distant coyote cries, and dust storms could appear suddenly, leaving travelers disoriented and exposed. Life here demanded resilience, courage, and a keen sense of survival. Among the settlers, fear was a constant companion. Stories of raids by outlaws and Apache warriors circulated in hushed tones around campfires. Families barricaded their small homes with whatever materials they could find, and armed guards often patrolled the outskirts of the settlements. Every stranger was eyed with suspicion. Every shadow was watched, and every sound in the canyon could be a warning of an approaching threat. Amidst this tension, the presence of lawmen brought both relief and unease. While they symbolized order and justice, their arrival often meant that trouble was close behind. Marshal James Hawthorne was a man shaped by the unforgiving frontier. He had spent years tracking outlaws across the deserts and mountains of the Southwest. His reputation was well known. Relentless, determined, and intelligent. Few criminals had escaped his pursuit. Hawthorne was a tall, imposing figure, with weathered skin from years in the sun, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Yet, despite his tough exterior, he carried a weight of past failures. He had once lost a man he had sworn to bring to justice, and the memory haunted him. That failure had become both a lesson and a burden. It drove him, but it also made him cautious, never fully trusting appearances, never underestimating an opponent. Hawthorne arrived at Devil's Anvil following reports of a notorious outlaw gang operating in the region. The gang, led by Eli Black Fang Donovan, had become infamous for their daring robberies of stagecoaches, trains, and small settlements. Donovan was known for his cunning, his ruthlessness, and his ability to escape impossible situations. While his appearance was striking dark hair, piercing eyes, and a confident, almost arrogant posture, it was his unpredictability that made him truly dangerous. He understood the terrain like the back of his hand and used it to his advantage, making him nearly impossible to catch. Many lawmen before Hawthorne had tried and failed, leaving a trail of broken dreams and lost lives behind them. Donovan had chosen Devil's Anvil for a reason. The canyon's natural walls provided cover and created natural choke points. From hidden ledges, he and his men could watch the trails below, ambushing travelers before they even saw danger coming. The canyon was a labyrinth of narrow paths, rocky overhangs, and sudden drops. For anyone unfamiliar with the land, it was treacherous. One wrong step could mean a broken leg, or worse. Donovan's gang had been preparing for months, stockpiling supplies, and learning the terrain. They were ready for anyone who dared challenge them. Amid the tension and danger, another figure moved silently through the canyon. Nayeli was a young Apache woman, respected among her people for her intelligence, bravery, and deep knowledge of the land. She had grown up listening to the stories of her ancestors, learning how to read the signs in the desert, the tracks of animals, the direction of the wind, and the subtle changes in the landscape. Her life had been marked by both hardship and resilience. She had witnessed her people suffer at the hands of settlers, soldiers, and outlaws alike. Despite these hardships, Nayeli was known for her compassion and her determination to protect her community whenever possible. Nayeli had earned a reputation among both settlers and lawmen as a skilled guide. She could navigate the most dangerous parts of the desert with ease, avoiding ambushes, finding water where none seemed to exist, and leading people safely through seemingly impossible terrain. Yet, her role was complicated. She was caught between two worlds, the Apache tribes and the encroaching settlers. Trust was always a delicate balance. While some settlers relied on her guidance, others viewed her with suspicion, unsure whether she would help or hinder them. Nayeli carried the weight of her people's history on her shoulders and understood that every decision could have life or death consequences. As Hawthorne moved closer to Devil's Anvil, he relied on both his experience and the reports he had gathered. He knew that Donovan's gang would not make mistakes. They were organized, ruthless, and patient. Every trap, every ambush, had been carefully planned. Hawthorne had to think several steps ahead. He studied maps, examined trails, and questioned local settlers who had encountered the outlaws. Every detail mattered. A misstep could cost him his life and the lives of those he sought to protect. At the same time, Donovan was planning his next strike. He had heard of a stagecoach carrying gold and other valuable goods through the canyon. It was the perfect target, rich, poorly defended, and in a location where the terrain gave him every advantage. Donovan's men had prepared the ambush meticulously, placing lookouts along the high cliffs and setting traps along the trail. He had also been careful to conceal his true intentions, misleading anyone who might be watching. For Donovan, the canyon was not just a hiding place, it was a stage where he could orchestrate both fear and profit. The stage was set for a collision of worlds. The lawman, with a relentless drive for justice, the outlaw with a cunning mind and ruthless ambition, and the Apache woman with knowledge, bravery, and loyalty to her people were all on a path that would converge in Devil's Anvil. Each of them carried secrets, skills, and motivations that would determine who survived the coming storm. The canyon, silent and imposing, waited for the inevitable clash. Even the local settlers sensed the growing tension. Farmers, traders, and families watched the horizon anxiously, knowing that trouble could arrive at any moment. The wind seemed to carry whispers of the violence that might come. Children played cautiously near their homes, and elders offered prayers for protection. The canyon, with its towering walls and shadowed paths, seemed alive with anticipation. Every sound, the rustle of a lizard, the caw of a distant crow, the clatter of hooves felt like a warning. It was a place where the smallest decisions could have enormous consequences, and everyone knew it. In this harsh and beautiful land, the story of Devil's Anvil was about to unfold. It was a story of courage, betrayal, and survival, a story where lives would be tested, alliances would be strained, and the harsh realities of the frontier would leave no one untouched. Marshal Hawthorne, Eli Donovan, and Nayeli each faced their own challenges. But they were bound by the same fate. The canyon demanded respect, cunning, and endurance. The coming weeks would reveal who could navigate the treacherous paths, who would succumb to greed or fear, and who would emerge with their life and honor intact. As the sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, the first whispers of the death lottery began. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, the howl of a coyote echoed, a chilling reminder that nature itself was a formidable adversary. For Hawthorne, Donovan, and Nayeli, this was only the beginning. Every choice mattered. Every move could change the outcome, and the desert had a way of testing even the strongest hearts. In Devil's Anvil, there would be no easy victories, only survival, cunning, and the courage to face what lay ahead. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the story of betrayal, courage, and deadly choices was ready to unfold in one of the most dangerous corners of the American frontier. In this land of harsh sun, rugged cliffs, and unyielding desert, the events of 1876 would leave a mark that no one would forget. The morning after Marshal James Hawthorne arrived at the edge of Devil's Anvil brought little comfort to the settlers. The sun rose over the jagged cliffs, painting them in shades of gold and red, but its warmth did nothing to ease the tension in the air. People moved cautiously, keeping an eye on the trails that cut through the canyon. Farmers checked fences, merchants secured their goods, and mothers gathered their children close, all aware that danger could strike at any moment. Word had spread quickly that the outlaw Eli Black Fang Donovan was nearby, and his reputation had preceded him. Everyone knew his name, and everyone feared it. Hawthorne wasted no time. He knew that waiting for trouble was dangerous. In Devil's Anvil, action often determined survival. He began asking questions among the settlers, gathering information about the canyon trails, recent sightings, and the movements of Donovan's gang. Each person he spoke with offered fragments of information, some true and some exaggerated by fear. Hawthorne had learned to separate fact from fiction through years of chasing criminals. But even he found the task challenging in a place as unpredictable as Devil's Anvil. The canyon was full of hidden crevices, twisting paths, and high ledges where danger could strike from above or below. A single misstep could turn a routine investigation into a deadly trap. Meanwhile, Eli Donovan was preparing his next move. He had spent the night studying the trails, noting the weak points in the settlers' defenses and imagining the chaos he could create. Donovan was meticulous. Every plan he made had layers of deception, and he was confident that no one could see through them. Yet, even he knew that one mistake could be fatal. The desert had a way of punishing the overconfident. Donovan's gang was loyal, but loyalty among outlaws was often fragile, bound more by fear and self-interest than true allegiance. He knew he had to control the situation carefully, and that meant anticipating not just the actions of the settlers, but also those of Marshal Hawthorne. Among the key players in this tense situation was Nayeli, the young Apache woman whose skills and knowledge of the land were unmatched. She moved quietly along the canyon trails, observing, listening, and planning. Nayeli had been aware of Donovan's gang long before Hawthorne arrived. She had seen them move through the desert, leaving destruction in their wake. Her people had suffered because of bandits like Donovan, and she felt a personal responsibility to prevent further harm. Yet, she also understood the delicate balance of power in the canyon. Any wrong move could bring violence not just to the outlaws, but to the settlers and her own community. Nayeli had learned that patience and careful observation were as powerful as courage and skill. Hawthorne and Nayeli's paths crossed at a small water source near the canyon's edge. The stream was narrow, but it provided one of the few reliable sources of water in the area. Nayeli had been tracking signs of Donovan's gang footprints, broken branches, and remnants of campfires. She recognized the Marshal immediately, having heard descriptions from settlers who had met him briefly. There was a moment of cautious assessment between the two. Trust did not come easily in the frontier, especially when lives were at stake. Hawthorne understood that Nayeli's knowledge of the terrain was invaluable. Nayeli knew that his experience as a lawman could be equally crucial. Despite the mutual suspicion, they decided to work together, forming an alliance born out of necessity rather than friendship. Their collaboration began with mapping out possible ambush points. Nayeli led Hawthorne along hidden paths, showing him where the cliffs dropped sharply and where the terrain created natural bottlenecks. She explained the movements of animals, the direction of winds, and how the shadows could conceal people or objects. Hawthorne absorbed every detail, noting where traps might be set and where his own forces could be vulnerable. For both of them, knowledge of the land was not just power, it was survival. They spent hours walking the canyon trails, speaking in low voices, careful not to reveal their positions to anyone who might be watching. Each step reinforced the reality that Devil's Anvil was as dangerous as any outlaw, and perhaps even more unpredictable. Meanwhile, Donovan's planning became more urgent. He had learned of a stagecoach carrying gold and other valuables that would pass through the canyon within days. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Donovan's mind raced through every possible scenario: how to position his men, how to control the terrain, and how to eliminate any threats without losing a single member of his gang unnecessarily. He placed sentries on high ledges, prepared traps along the main trail, and communicated with his gang in whispers that carried just far enough to be heard, but never far enough to be traced. Every detail was considered, every angle analyzed. The outlaw's cunning was evident, and it became clear why he had evaded capture for so long. But the desert had its own rules. The unpredictability of the canyon could turn even the best-laid plans upside down. Nayeli knew this better than anyone. She observed signs of the wind shifting, the movement of wildlife, and subtle changes in the terrain that might give away Donovan's plans. Her role was not just to guide Hawthorne but to anticipate the unforeseen dangers of the environment itself. The canyon could be an ally or an enemy, depending on how one approached it. Nayeli's intuition and experience gave her a unique advantage. She could see threats that others might overlook, whether they came from men or nature. As the day progressed, tension in Devil's Anvil grew. Settlers moved nervously along the trails, aware that something significant was about to happen. Hawthorne and Nayeli continued their reconnaissance, discussing strategies and contingency plans. Each of them understood that failure was not an option. The lives of settlers, the outcome of the stagecoach robbery, and even their own survival, depended on careful preparation and decisive action. Every rustle in the brush, every bird in flight, and every shadow along the cliff face became a potential signal of danger. Their minds remained alert, their bodies tense, ready for anything, yet even with careful planning, uncertainty remained. Donovan's gang was unpredictable, and the loyalty of outlaws could change at a moment's notice. Hawthorne knew that betrayal could come from the most unexpected source, and he remained cautious, always watching, always anticipating. Nayeli, too, understood that her role carried risks. She was guiding an outsider through her land, risking her own safety to protect both settlers and her people. The stakes were high, and one wrong move could result in disaster. Despite this, both Hawthorne and Nayeli pressed on, their determination strengthened by the knowledge that lives depended on their success. As the sun began to sink behind the canyon walls, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, a sense of foreboding settled over Devil's Anvil. The day's heat faded, replaced by the cool chill of evening, but the danger remained. The stagecoach was still days away, yet every step of preparation mattered. Hawthorne and Nayeli knew that the coming confrontation would test not just their skills but their courage and resolve. They would face not only the outlaws but the harsh realities of the canyon itself. The canyon demanded respect, patience, and careful thought. It would reveal who was clever, who was brave, and who would survive the deadly gamble that was about to unfold. In this tense and fragile environment, the seeds of conflict had been planted. The stage was set for a clash of wills. The lawman determined to uphold justice, the outlaw seeking wealth and power, and the Apache woman navigating loyalty and survival. Each of them carried motives, fears, and ambitions, and their paths were converging with inevitable force. Every decision they made in the coming days would shape the outcome of the battle for Devil's Anvil. The desert, silent and watchful, seemed to anticipate the approaching storm, and the canyon itself held the stories of danger, betrayal, and courage that were about to unfold. Even as night fell, the canyon remained alive with movement. Coyotes called from hidden crevices, the wind whispered through the rocks, and the shadows seemed to shift with a life of their own. Hawthorne and Nayeli set up a temporary observation post, keeping watch over the trails below. Donovan, meanwhile, continued his preparations, unaware that the Marshal and his new ally were already anticipating his moves. The tension was almost unbearable, as if the entire canyon were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash that would determine the fate of all who lived in and around Devil's Anvil. The days ahead promised danger, strategy, and betrayal. Every character was moving into position, their choices guided by knowledge, instinct, and necessity. The desert was both battlefield and teacher, shaping the actions of everyone who dared to step into its treacherous embrace. The story of Devil's Anvil was beginning in earnest, and the stage was perfectly set for a deadly game where only the clever, the brave, and the prepared would survive. The night in Devil's Anvil was quiet, but heavy with tension. The stars twinkled coldly above, and the crescent moon barely lit the canyon floor. Every shadow seemed darker. Every sound amplified the whisper of the wind through the rocks, the faint scurrying of desert creatures, and the distant cry of a coyote. Marshal James Hawthorne crouched behind a jagged boulder, peering toward the main trail below. He had spent hours observing, noting every movement, every sound that could indicate the approach of Eli, Black Fang, Donovan, or his gang. The desert had a way of amplifying danger, and Hawthorne knew that patience was as important as courage. One misstep could mean death. Nayeli moved silently alongside him, her movements as fluid as the wind. She had scouted the area during the day, memorizing every turn, every ledge, every narrow passage that could serve as an ambush point. Now, under the cloak of darkness, She guided the Marshal to higher vantage points, where they could see without being seen. She whispered warnings, pointing out areas where traps might be set or where the outlaws could hide. Her knowledge of the canyon gave Hawthorne confidence, but he still remained cautious. He knew that Donovan was clever, and clever men often used the terrain to their advantage in ways that could surprise even the most experienced lawman. Meanwhile, Donovan's gang moved through the canyon with the precision of hunters. Their footsteps were soft, and their voices were hushed, barely audible over the wind. The stagecoach carrying gold and other valuables was expected to arrive by dawn, and every member of the gang knew that timing was critical. Donovan had instructed them to wait until the last possible moment, using the canyon's natural bottlenecks to trap the travelers. Yet, Donovan's mind was never fully at ease. He had always been aware that outlaws were prone to betrayal, that the desert had its own dangers, and that lawmen like Hawthorne could appear unexpectedly. His instincts told him that something was different this time, though he could not yet identify the source of unease. As the hours passed, Hawthorne and Nayeli noticed subtle signs that confirmed their fears. Footprints in the soft soil, broken twigs, and disturbed stones indicated that Donovan's men had already begun moving into position. Nayeli interpreted the signs with a practiced eye, pointing out which tracks belonged to which gang members and what weapons they might be carrying. Hawthorne made careful notes, formulating a strategy that could give him the advantage despite being outnumbered. They both understood that the upcoming confrontation would be dangerous and that mistakes could prove fatal. In Devil's Anvil, courage alone was never enough. Careful planning and sharp instincts were equally essential. As dawn approached, the canyon remained still, but charged with anticipation. The first light of morning revealed long shadows stretching across the jagged cliffs. Hawthorne signaled to Nayeli to take her positions. They both knew that the stagecoach's arrival would trigger the confrontation they had been preparing for. Every muscle was tense, every sense alert. The air seemed to thrum with the promise of violence, and the canyon itself appeared to lean in, as if watching, waiting for the inevitable clash. Then, the sound of hooves echoed faintly from the distance. The stagecoach, heavily laden with gold and supplies, rounded a bend in the trail. The horse's breath steamed in the cool morning air, and the driver urged them forward, unaware of the deadly trap awaiting him. Donovan's gang moved into position, each man ready to spring the ambush. From hidden ledges, they could see the travelers clearly, and a sense of anticipation rippled through the outlaws. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The timing, the placement of each gang member, the control of the terrain. Yet, Donovan remained anxious. Something felt off, though he could not identify it. Suddenly, a subtle signal disrupted the carefully orchestrated plan. One of Donovan's men, a younger outlaw whose loyalty was shaky, had begun to doubt the gang leader's intentions. He had heard stories about Hawthorne's skill and feared the consequences of the coming ambush. Quietly, he moved to alert the Marshal, risking the wrath of Donovan. This act of betrayal, though silent and subtle, sent a ripple through the canyon that would soon explode into chaos. Hawthorne noticed a slight movement on a distant ledge and instinctively understood that someone was signaling him. He gestured to Nayeli, and together, they adjusted their positions, preparing for the confrontation to come. The stagecoach drew closer, its occupants unaware of the danger. The horses snorted and pawed the ground, sensing tension in the air. The driver urged them onward, and the passengers clutched their belongings tightly. For them, the journey was routine, but in Devil's Anvil, routine often ended in disaster. Hawthorne and Nayeli watched every movement, calculating the best way to protect the stagecoach while neutralizing the threat of Donovan's gang. The betrayal from within the outlaws gave them an unexpected advantage, but it also complicated the situation. If discovered too soon, it could trigger a violent reaction from Donovan, putting everyone at risk. As the stagecoach entered the canyon's narrow passage, the ambush began. Donovan's men sprang from their hiding places, shouting and firing weapons. The air filled with the crack of gunfire, the whinny of horses, and the screams of startled passengers. Hawthorne and Nayeli moved quickly, using the terrain to their advantage, returning fire, and guiding the stagecoach away from the most dangerous zones. The young outlaw who had betrayed Donovan risked his life, moving cautiously to avoid detection while signaling Hawthorne to the gang's positions. Every second counted. Every decision carried life or death consequences. Chaos erupted in the canyon. The sound of gunfire echoed off the cliffs, amplifying the intensity of the conflict. Dust and debris filled the air, and the once silent canyon became a battlefield. Hawthorne's experience allowed him to anticipate Donovan's movements, while Nayeli's knowledge of the terrain enabled her to direct settlers and passengers to hidden exits. The combination of skill, courage, and quick thinking created a fragile advantage, but the situation remained deadly. Donovan's cunning and unpredictability made him a formidable opponent, and even a small mistake could turn the tide. Amid the firefight, Nayeli confronted her own fears. She had faced danger many times before, but protecting others while under direct threat brought a new level of responsibility. Her focus never wavered, guiding the settlers to safety, warning Hawthorne of approaching threats, and using every ounce of her knowledge to outmaneuver the outlaws. The desert, with its steep cliffs and narrow passages, became both a shield and a challenge. Each movement required precision, and the margin for error was nearly non-existent. Her bravery was tested in ways that few could imagine. And yet she remained composed, using courage and intelligence to navigate the deadly chaos. Donovan, realizing that his plans were unraveling, grew increasingly desperate. He shouted orders, trying to regain control of the situation, but the unexpected betrayal and the coordinated efforts of Hawthorne and Nayeli disrupted his strategy. The canyon, with its natural bottlenecks and treacherous terrain, worked against him as much as it had for his victims. Each decision he made was countered by someone anticipating his moves, forcing him into a dangerous game of survival rather than dominance. The tension reached its peak, with every participant aware that a single misstep could end in death. The battle in Devil's Anvil was not just a test of skill but also of character. Loyalties were tested, courage was demanded, and every individual faced choices that would determine life or death. Hawthorne's steady determination, Nayeli's unmatched knowledge, and the unexpected betrayal within Donovan's gang combined to create a scenario where survival depended on wit, agility, and foresight. The canyon bore witness to the clash of these forces, echoing with the sounds of conflict and the unspoken tension of anticipation. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the chaos began to subside. Some of Donovan's men had fled, others were captured or incapacitated, and the stagecoach, though shaken, had escaped the worst of the ambush. The canyon, once again silent, seemed to exhale, as if recovering from the violence it had contained. Hawthorne and Nayeli surveyed the aftermath, noting the lessons learned and the challenges that remained. They knew that the battle was far from over. Donovan himself had escaped, vowing revenge, and the canyon still held many dangers. The betrayal that had helped turn the tide would have lasting consequences, both for the outlaws and for the survivors of the ambush. In the quiet that followed, the canyon seemed almost serene, but everyone involved understood that this calm was temporary. The desert had a way of testing resilience and patience, and the events of the past hours were only a prelude to the conflicts yet to come. Hawthorne, Nayeli, and the remaining settlers had survived, but the lessons of Devil's Anvil were clear. Trust was fragile, danger was constant, and survival required both courage and cunning. The betrayal had changed the course of the battle, but it also highlighted the unpredictable nature of life in the frontier, where every action carried weight and every choice could mean the difference between life and death. The events of that morning set the stage for future confrontations. Donovan, though temporarily thwarted, remained a threat, and the canyon's residents were acutely aware of the precarious balance between law, crime, and survival. Hawthorne and Nayeli had proven their skill and courage, but they knew that vigilance would be required for the days to come. In Devil's Anvil, every sunrise brought new challenges, Every shadow concealed potential danger, and every sound could signal the beginning of another deadly encounter. The betrayal within Donovan's ranks had shifted the balance, but the story was far from over. The sun had risen high over Devil's Anvil, casting sharp shadows across the jagged cliffs. The canyon, still echoing from the morning's chaos, was now a dangerous maze of rocks, dust, and scattered belongings. The events of the previous night had changed everything. Marshal James Hawthorne knew that Donovan would not stay hidden for long. The outlaw had lost some men in the ambush, but his cunning mind and determination made him an even greater threat. Hawthorne had to act quickly if he wanted to prevent further bloodshed. Every second counted, and every choice could mean the difference between life and death. Nayeli moved cautiously alongside Hawthorne, her eyes scanning every ledge, every crevice, and every shadow. She had guided settlers to temporary safety during the initial ambush, but the danger was far from over. Her knowledge of the canyon was unparalleled, and she used it to anticipate where Donovan might strike next. She had already predicted some of his movements, but the outlaw's unpredictable nature made her uneasy. She could sense that Donovan was planning something bold, something that could trap them all if they were not careful. The canyon was alive with tension, and every sound seemed amplified: the rustle of a lizard, the distant call of a hawk, the faint clatter of rocks shifting underfoot. Donovan had regrouped with the remnants of his gang on a narrow ledge high above the canyon floor. His dark eyes scanned the landscape below, searching for signs of Hawthorne or Nayeli. He was furious about the betrayal of one of his men, but he could not let anger cloud his judgment. The stagecoach had escaped, but he had learned valuable information about the Marshal's tactics. Donovan's mind worked quickly, calculating the best way to turn the situation to his advantage. He knew the canyon better than anyone, and he intended to use it as both a shield and a weapon. The canyon floor became a battlefield of strategy and survival. Hawthorne moved carefully, taking positions behind boulders and using the rocky terrain to shield himself. He signaled to Nayeli, who guided him toward higher ground, where they could observe Donovan's gang without being seen. Every movement was deliberate, every decision measured. Hawthorne had survived many dangerous encounters, but the canyon demanded respect. He knew that Donovan was clever, but he also understood that desperation could lead to mistakes. The Marshal was determined to exploit any error, however small, to bring the outlaw to justice. Nayeli's role was crucial. She directed Hawthorne's attention to hidden paths and natural choke points where Donovan might try to ambush them again. She understood that the canyon could be an ally if used wisely. Her calm demeanor belied the fear that lurked beneath. She had faced danger many times before, but this confrontation tested her more than any previous encounter. Her goal was not just survival, but protecting those who depended on her knowledge: the settlers, the stagecoach passengers, and even Hawthorne himself. She had to act decisively, using both intelligence and instinct to stay ahead of the outlaws. As the morning wore on, Donovan made his move. He had positioned his gang along a narrow stretch of the canyon, planning to ambush Hawthorne and Nayeli as they advanced. The terrain was perfect for his strategy: steep cliffs on either side, a narrow path that forced anyone traveling through it into a confined space, and hidden ledges from which his men could strike. Donovan signaled to his gang, and they prepared to spring the trap. Yet, he had not anticipated the betrayal of his own man, nor the foresight of Hawthorne and Nayeli. The canyon, unpredictable as ever, was about to become a deadly game of strategy and survival. Hawthorne and Nayeli advanced carefully, aware that the outlaws could attack at any moment. Hawthorne's experience allowed him to predict Donovan's likely positions, while Nayeli's knowledge of the terrain provided safe paths and hidden vantage points. They moved silently, communicating with subtle gestures, each understanding the importance of timing and precision. The tension was palpable, as if the canyon itself held its breath. Every sound could be a warning, every movement a threat. The battle that was about to unfold demanded courage, skill, and quick thinking. Suddenly, gunfire erupted. Donovan's men had spotted the Marshal and Nayeli and opened fire from their hidden positions. The sound of bullets ricocheting off rocks filled the canyon, creating a deafening roar. Hawthorne returned fire with precision, using the terrain for cover. Nayeli guided the settlers and stagecoach passengers to hidden exits, her movements swift and decisive. Chaos erupted in the canyon as the two sides clashed. Dust filled the air. Horses reared in panic, and the cries of men and women echoed off the cliffs. The canyon, silent and foreboding just hours earlier, had transformed into a battlefield. Donovan, seeing that his initial strategy was failing, climbed to a higher ledge to gain an advantage. From this position, he could oversee the entire canyon floor, directing his remaining men and searching for a weakness in Hawthorne's position. His mind raced with plans, but he was growing frustrated. The betrayal of his gang member had disrupted everything. He had to act boldly to regain control, but every movement carried risk. The canyon's narrow paths limited his options, and the presence of Nayeli made it difficult to predict the Marshal's next move. Donovan's reputation for cunning was being tested in the harshest of environments. Amid the chaos, Nayeli took decisive action. She led a small group of settlers through a hidden path that Donovan's gang had not noticed, giving them safety while also drawing the outlaws' attention away from Hawthorne. Her quick thinking and intimate knowledge of the terrain allowed her to turn the canyon itself into an ally. She used the high cliffs and narrow ledges to channel the outlaws into positions where they could be easily targeted, creating opportunities for Hawthorne to strike with maximum effect. Every decision she made required courage and precision, and she remained calm under pressure, guiding others through the deadly maze. Hawthorne moved with relentless determination. He knew that the outcome of the battle depended not only on skill and courage, but also on timing and strategy. Using the cover of rocks and shadows, he advanced toward Donovan's position, carefully picking off outlaws, one by one. The Marshal's experience allowed him to anticipate enemy movements, avoiding traps and turning Donovan's own plans against him. Each shot, each maneuver, brought him closer to the ultimate goal, capturing Donovan and ending the threat to Devil's Anvil once and for all. The canyon floor became a chaotic dance of strategy and survival. Outlaws scrambled for cover, settlers ran for safety, and the air was thick with dust, smoke, and tension. Donovan's frustration grew as his plans unraveled. He had underestimated the combination of Hawthorne's experience and Nayeli's knowledge of the land. The betrayal of his gang member had not only disrupted his strategy but also strengthened the determination of his opponents. Every attempt to regain control was met with resistance, forcing Donovan into increasingly desperate and dangerous actions. At a critical moment, Hawthorne managed to corner Donovan near a steep cliff overlooking a rushing river. The outlaw's options were limited, and he realized that his cunning alone would not save him. The terrain that had once been his advantage was now a trap, and the consequences of his actions were closing in. Donovan's eyes darted between the Marshal and the canyon below, weighing his options. Every instinct told him to fight, to escape, to survive. But the realization dawned that his plans had failed. Hawthorne, steady and unyielding, prepared to bring the outlaw to justice, while Nayeli ensured that the settlers were safely removed from the danger zone. The climax of the battle tested every skill, every ounce of courage, and every decision made by those involved. The canyon, with its harsh cliffs and narrow passages, amplified the danger and the intensity of the confrontation. Hawthorne's determination, Nayeli's knowledge, and the unpredictable nature of Donovan's desperation combined to create a tense, high-stakes struggle. Each action had consequences, each choice was critical, and survival required both intelligence and bravery. The canyon itself seemed to challenge them, forcing them to navigate treacherous terrain while engaging in a deadly struggle of skill and willpower. By the time the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the battle had reached its conclusion. Donovan was captured. His remaining gang either fled or incapacitated, and the stagecoach and settlers were safe. The canyon, once alive with chaos, had returned to a tense quiet. The aftermath revealed the true costs of the confrontation: exhaustion, injuries, and the stark realization that survival in Devil's Anvil demanded vigilance and courage at all times. Hawthorne and Nayeli surveyed the scene, understanding that the desert had tested them in ways they could never have anticipated. The battle had been won, but the lessons would endure, shaping their understanding of trust, loyalty, and the unpredictable power of the frontier. The sun was beginning its slow descent over Devil's Anvil, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. The dust from the morning's battle had settled, leaving the rocky terrain quiet, almost eerily so. For Marshal James Hawthorne, the calm was a welcome but uneasy relief. The outlaw Eli Blackfang Donovan had been captured, his gang scattered, and the stagecoach and settlers had survived. But the toll of the confrontation weighed heavily on everyone involved. Hawthorne wiped sweat and dust from his brow and surveyed the canyon floor. Though victorious, he knew that in the frontier, victory often came with a high price, and survival was never guaranteed. Nayeli moved among the settlers, ensuring that everyone was accounted for. Some were bruised, shaken, or frightened, but all were alive. She had guided them through hidden paths, using her knowledge of the canyon to keep them out of danger during the ambush and the following chaos. Her eyes, sharp and observant as always, scanned the horizon for any remaining threats. Though Donovan had been captured, the canyon's natural hazards, narrow ledges, sudden drops, and hidden pitfalls, remained ever present. Nayeli understood that even in moments of victory, caution was essential. The desert did not forgive recklessness, and one misstep could undo everything they had achieved. Hawthorne approached Donovan, who sat bound near a boulder, exhaustion and defeat etched on his face. The outlaw's dark eyes burned with defiance, but even his cunning could not escape the consequences of his actions. Hawthorne had anticipated much of Donovan's strategy, but the chaos of the ambush had tested every skill and instinct he possessed. The Marshal looked at Donovan not with anger, but with the solemn understanding of someone who had seen the consequences of crime and greed. Justice had been served, but at a cost that would not be forgotten. Donovan's capture brought relief to the settlers, but it also brought a sobering realization. The desert, with its unforgiving terrain and harsh conditions, had been as much an opponent as the outlaw himself. The canyon had demanded courage, patience, and careful strategy. Every decision, every step, every shot, every choice to trust or to move cautiously had mattered. Hawthorne and Nayeli had survived through a combination of skill, courage, and careful observation. But they were aware that survival in the frontier was a fleeting achievement. Danger was always nearby, and the lessons learned in Devil's Anvil would need to be remembered for years to come. As the day wore on, Hawthorne and Nayeli worked together to secure the remaining gang members who had fled the initial battle. Some were captured easily, while others had vanished into the desert, using their knowledge of the terrain to escape. Each capture reminded the Marshal and Nayeli of the complexity of life on the frontier. Outlaws were often clever, driven by desperation or greed, and the desert itself offered endless hiding places. Hawthorne knew that while they had won this battle, vigilance would be required to prevent future attacks. The fragile piece of Devil's Anvil was temporary, and the desert had a way of testing even the most prepared. The settlers began to repair the damage done during the confrontation. Broken fences were mended, supplies were recovered or replaced, and homes that had been threatened were reinforced. Amid this work, there was a quiet sense of gratitude toward Hawthorne and Nayeli. The Marshal's courage and experience had saved lives, and Nayeli's knowledge and guidance had been invaluable. For many of the settlers, the events of the past day would remain a vivid memory, a reminder of both the dangers they faced and the extraordinary bravery of those who had protected them. The story of the ambush would be told for years around campfires, growing into a legend that highlighted courage, loyalty, and the unforgiving nature of the frontier. Despite the relief, Nayeli could not ignore the impact on her own people. She had risked her life to protect settlers, but her actions were guided by a desire to prevent further bloodshed among the Apache. She understood that the frontier was a place where alliances were delicate and decisions were complex. Her people had suffered from both outlaws and settlers, and her role in guiding Hawthorne had required careful balance. Nayeli knew that courage alone was not enough. Wisdom, strategy, and understanding of human nature were equally important. Her reputation as a mediator and protector was solidified, but she carried the memory of the canyon's violence with her. a reminder of the harsh realities of survival in the desert. Hawthorne and Nayeli stood together at the edge of a cliff, looking down over the canyon floor. The wind stirred the dust, carrying with it the faint scent of desert sage and the distant call of a hawk. Hawthorne spoke quietly, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The capture of Donovan was a victory, but it was not without its lessons. The Marshal understood that the frontier was a place where law and justice were often tested against cunning, greed, and the unpredictability of the land itself. Every decision he had made had been critical. Every action a matter of life or death. Yet, he also recognized the importance of allies like Nayeli, whose knowledge, courage, and wisdom had turned the tide of the confrontation. Donovan, meanwhile, was taken into custody under the watchful eyes of Hawthorne and the remaining lawmen. His capture marked the end of his immediate threat. But the outlaw's story would not end there. He had survived numerous confrontations before, relying on cunning and the harsh terrain of the frontier. Even in defeat, Donovan's defiance was evident, a reminder of the dangerous and unpredictable nature of those who chose the path of crime. For Hawthorne, the capture was a moment of accomplishment, but also a solemn reminder of the ongoing struggle to maintain law and order in a land defined by both beauty and danger. As night approached, the canyon was quiet once more. The settlers had gathered around campfires, tending to wounds and sharing stories of survival. There was a shared sense of relief, but also an acknowledgement of the fragility of life in the desert. The events of the day had left an indelible mark on everyone present. Hawthorne and Nayeli, though weary, knew that their vigilance had prevented greater tragedy. The canyon had tested their skills, courage, and resolve, and they had emerged not unscathed, but alive and triumphant. The memory of the ambush and the betrayal that had nearly changed everything would remain, a lesson in the unpredictable nature of the frontier. In the days that followed, life in Devil's Anvil began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Settlers repaired homes and fences, traders resumed their routes, and the stagecoach continued its journeys through the canyon. Yet, the story of the ambush and the deadly conflict with Donovan became a part of local legend. Hawthorne's name was spoken with respect, a symbol of law and perseverance, while Nayeli's courage and knowledge earned her lasting recognition among both settlers and her own people. The events had forged a bond of trust and mutual respect between the Marshal and the young Apache woman, a rare connection in a land often defined by suspicion and survival. The canyon itself seemed unchanged, yet it had witnessed something extraordinary. The confrontation, the betrayal, and the courageous acts of Hawthorne and Nayeli had left a lasting mark on the memory of the land. For the settlers, the canyon remained both a home and a reminder of danger. For the Apache, it was a landscape intertwined with history, survival, and wisdom. The balance of power, trust, and respect in Devil's Anvil had been tested, and the lessons learned would endure for years to come. Hawthorne and Nayeli parted ways with a quiet understanding of what had been accomplished. The Marshal would continue his pursuit of justice across the frontier, while Nayeli would return to her people. Her reputation strengthened, and her resolve sharpened. Each carried the memory of Devil's Anvil and the deadly events of 1876. Knowing that survival in the desert required not only courage, but wisdom, preparation, and respect for the land and its hidden dangers. The canyon had been a crucible, shaping those who entered it and testing every skill, every decision, and every ounce of courage. As the final rays of sunlight faded behind the cliffs, the desert returned to its quiet state. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the faint echoes of the confrontation. The story of Devil's Anvil, the ambush, and the deadly death lottery would be remembered by all who had survived. A tale of courage, betrayal, and survival in the unforgiving American frontier. Lives had been tested, alliances forged and broken, and the harsh realities of the desert had left their mark on everyone involved. The canyon would remain, unchanged, yet forever marked by the events that had unfolded within its jagged walls. The legacy of the battle was clear. Hawthorne's skill, Nayeli's wisdom, and the unforeseen betrayal of an outlaw had combined to shape the outcome, proving that courage, intelligence, and careful planning could overcome even the most dangerous circumstances. The story would be told for generations, a reminder of the fragile balance between law, crime, and survival in the frontier. Devil's Anvil had claimed its place in history, not merely as a location, but as a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and the unyielding power of the land.